And we are now back in open session, and I need approval of the minutes from our June 10th meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion on those minutes? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Next I need approval of the agenda for tonight.
So approved.
Jack,
Second.
second by Mark, and there were no additions or changes?
No, that's right.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And the first thing tonight, even before our public comments or anything, we have a budget hearing for 2019-20. Steve?
Thank you, Joan. Do any board members want a hard copy of the budget? I do have it in your board.
Yeah, I want
If you would like
Yes,
a hard
please.
I
copy.
would like one too.
Put that
Two
on.
more, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so I will pass around a couple more copies. That would make less pages. So to begin with, I'll just mention to the members of the public who are watching this at a later time, that on the district's webpage, there is a section called District. And if you go to the district section, you can select Business Services. And from Business Services, you can select Budget Planning. And then you're able to see all of the budget documents going back to earlier this spring or late winter that we've been working on since about January. So the public is welcome to take a look at that information and view all of the documents that we've been using so far in the process. Some background: the governor signed the 2019-2021 state budget on July 3rd. On July 1st, the budget committee met. One of the outcomes from that meeting was the recommendation of preparing a fourth draft of the budget this year. Typically, we ask the school board to approve the third draft of the budget in July, and then we bring that forward to the annual meeting and budget hearing in October. After discussion, the budget committee's recommendation is that we adopt a fourth version of the budget, fourth draft, at the August meeting. The intent behind the fourth draft will be to take a look at what the governor's approval was and to make all appropriate changes for the fourth draft to then bring that forward to the annual meeting. The thinking behind that is to make sure that we have the most current available information available to the public at that meeting in October. Under the Budget Committee report for this evening, I'll provide an overview of the Joint Finance Committee motion and then the governor's approval of the budget. So I have a specific document under the Budget Committee that'll walk us through exactly what those changes are. As a reminder, our budget process for 2019-20 is based on a $200 per student increase. We projected that increase would come in the form of a per pupil categorical aid. We also estimated an enrollment during September of 4,403 students, which is 63 students more than what we had this past year. Our personnel budget includes a salary increase of 3.3%, a 0% increase in dental, and a 0% increase in health, which are our three largest increases that you might see from one year to the next. We do have $256,000 in maintenance projects that have been funded from the fund balance. This is the third year of a 3-year plan to spend down the fund balance that was basically set aside as a result of the 2014 referendum for operations and maintenance. It's the third year of spending those funds down, while at the same time the district is building up our Fund 41 capital maintenance projects. We have a total additional increase in staffing in this budget of a little over 16 FTE. That includes additional classroom teachers, a 6-track scheduling system at Heritage Elementary School, additional career and technical education electives at the middle school, an assistant principal at the high school, a crossing guard addition at Prairie Elementary School, and phase 1 of an administrative restructuring plan. The Fund 80 budget, which is the community service fund budget, has changes in the crossing guard position to Prairie Elementary School, scoreboard purchases for Heritage in the high school, the police liaison officer position moving from Fund 10 to Fund 80, and then the addition of a cost for a community ed PAC director and communications director position. A portion of those positions are being allocated to Fund 80, the community education fund. The tax levy is estimated to increase by 4.7%. If the property values in the community increase higher than 4.7%, then the tax rate will decline. If the property values are lower than 4.7%, then the tax rate is increased. From this point forward, what you could expect to see is the school board and community members. The 4th draft of the budget will come forward in August. In September, we have our 3rd Friday in September student count. On October 1st, the state of Wisconsin releases the property values for our community. On October 15th, the state releases the final equalization aid information. On October 21st, we have our annual meeting scheduled. The following Monday, October 28th, we'll be requesting a special board meeting to set the levy and to approve the budget. And at this time, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have regarding where we are at in the budget process or where we might be going over the next couple of months. And again, just as a reminder, later on this evening during the Budget Committee report, I'll provide information on the updates based on the Joint Finance Committee motion and what the governor did last week. So that'll be coming a little bit later in the meeting.
What is the community education PAC director? What's the purpose?
Sure, for the Fund 80 Community Education Director, what we are doing is capturing the position that's currently being held by Rick Braun, so it's not a new person. And we're looking at their position. We've evaluated the percentage of time that that individual puts in that's truly dedicated to community service. So the time that is used for outside groups unrelated to the school. And we are just allocating that percentage of cost to Fund 80 as opposed to Fund 10, the educational fund. And that is what helped us to add the 0.5 additional English teaching position at the high school. So it's not a new person, it's just looking at their time and documenting it in a different way.
So is it Rick Braun then?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. And again, broken record, the communications director, I just don't understand. How does that move education forward?
Yeah, and I think probably the first place I'd go back to is, and we can talk, Jack, about the presentation I gave at the last board meeting that I think went into parts of that. I think what we look at with regards to that position is really how do we serve our community, how do we serve our parents particularly, and keep them informed on the things that we are doing. And I think that level of support and communication, from my perspective, does help education. Mm-hmm. Is it going to be the piece that moves reading and math forward? I can't measure that piece of it, but can I measure that we do have a community that is very much wants to be engaged in what's happening in our schools? And I think that as we continue to become more sophisticated in some of the work that we're doing, and we are continuing to grow in that respect, that there's a need to be better at engagement with our community. So it's not simply teacher newsletters isn't what I'm talking about. It's the things that we've talked about all the way from communications from the board level to the community, letters to the editor, etc., to emergency planning, to really looking at how do we structure communications via our website, how do we send out start of school information, and it kind of goes on as we kind of look at all the different ways that we are communicating with not only our parents, but also with our community about what's happening in the schools. So that's my perspective of why we need it. Understand and respect your position on the questioning it, but that's, I guess, as I look at the work that we're doing, there's more of a need for us to be more engaged in that space. And I think right now we need someone who can be targeted at it to help make sure that we're tight with the communications that we're sending out.
And with that, are we still hiring the outside firm to post our?
At this point, we are for next year. And I think that was part of that when we approved that, was that to be reviewed for the following year. And I think that's still what the plan would be.
How much do you expect that position to be financially?
Full-time position is half times 30,000, full-time 60,000 with benefits on top of that. Right now we're looking at, just as we did with the PAC director, splitting that between Fund 10 and Fund 80 as far as some of the work where that's community service orientated for some of our community ed pool programs, etc. And then other, I think we've got it split 75-25%. There's also a piece right now that I think that's as the budget piece moves forward, we can determine kind of when we would hire that, depending on what those dollar amounts we'd have to allocate for this year. That's where we're at.
So 60,000 fully burdened is what,
80. 80-ish, somewhere in there, depending on what benefit they would take. And I think that falls generally in the average range of kind of where people are kind of funding these type of positions. Some of them have them at a much higher level, more of an executive communication director position. And then you have ones that are at a lower level, which are really more communication technician type folks. I think this is somewhere in between that.
All right, thank you. Moving on with our agenda tonight, at each meeting we always offer an opportunity for the public to make comments. If there is anybody here tonight, but know that that is available to people watching this. If you have a concern about an agenda item, please know that you have time to make comments at our meetings. Next, we have administrative reports, starting with any board member that attended any training since our last meeting that they'd like to share. Mark.
It wasn't training, but today I was able to attend Camp Kindergarten Beginning for my grandson.
Oh, that's awesome.
How
And
fun.
just a salute to our building administration throughout the district for the efficiency that all takes place. I was very impressed with what I saw at Heritage School. I know it replicates itself throughout the district. Very impressed with the staff and the administration, how efficient they are in helping these youngsters with excitement going for the first day. I was lucky to get a high five when it went by. So that was that. And then I did read a book put out by Mazzano Associates about teacher coaches. And Amy Johnson was nice enough to meet with me today to talk a little bit about what we do here. And again, just walked away very impressed with the breadth and depth of what we do with our program. Sometimes as a board, we approve the program, and sometimes we get a little feedback on what's going on, but it's, we've got literacy coaches in the 6 buildings, and we talked about a lot of things, from recruitment to what they do to how they're evaluated, and to get the whole picture was very very enlightening, and very appreciative of the time she spent with me on that. So it's very good stuff.
Sounds like a good board meeting topic.
Yeah.
Thank you. Julie.
I was thrilled to be able to also attend the Adaptive Schools Seminar, which kicked off with 2 days last month and another 2 days next week. Very much looking forward to that work. Many staff there, many administrators, and the goal and the focus of the seminar is how to work better in groups. So it's taking our PLC work up to the next level to make them more effective teams, and it was really interesting and lots of fun and a pleasure to be there, and I'm looking forward to learning more next week.
Yes, exactly. I also have been attending that conference, and I guess the joy, one of the greatest joys, is just working with staff members on a different level and getting to know them, and there's all the work of the two presenters and the ability to mix and interact is just, it's a great opportunity, and I have also very much enjoyed that. Looking forward to next week. Any other, anybody that would like to comment on that? Moving on to the committee schedule for the 2019-2020 school year. It is in your board packet. I don't know, Randy, if you want to take that.
I think we did this a year ago, and I think this was helpful, at least to give us a rough outline of what committees need to meet generally throughout the year. What I'd recommend that we do is, as our committees meet in the next couple months, that we have this on the agenda for those meetings, just to kind of touch base and see kind of where we are, just have it as part of our future meetings. It can fit into that agenda item, just to see if this is really meeting the needs of that committee and if we need to make some adjustments. This is generally what we did this year. Rebecca went back through, looked at our history, and looked at which committees met at which times. There were a few that we wanted to make sure that they met more frequently this past year, which we've been able to accomplish, but this is generally the schedule that we followed. You do see kind of a trend as you're in the year a little bit lighter towards the beginning of the year, then it gets more heavy towards the end, and I think that's reminiscent of also the work of schools. So, but that's a piece I'd just put out there. It gives us at least a bit of a guide, and then I think when we get to our committee meetings in the next and over the summer, we can touch base and see if that's meeting those specific committees' needs, and then make adjustments accordingly. It's just a guide.
Thank you, Randy.
Yep.
Next is our strategic planning for the evening, and we have two presentations, one on referendum planning and the second one on referendum timeline. I think both have gone through the facility committee, and I'm not sure who's
I'll kick it off, then I'll turn it over to Steve. The two presentations tonight are ones that we spent considerable time with the facilities committee, I guess, learning and reviewing. And they really cover a couple different topics. One of them is just the nuts and bolts and basics of referendums, the laws, the rules that we have to follow. And then also a piece that we've really done as an exercise to really articulate kind of what does a referenda cycle look like over the next 8 to 10 years. And that's really a question of, are we better off looking at smaller sized referendums and have more of them, or having larger scale referendums and having fewer of them, and having really a projection from a financial aspect to look at that. So the first presentation really covers those two things. The second one looks at timelines, and that's just stating, as we start to look at our Mark Roffer's report, which shows like when we have growth coming in our district, that really, if we are trying to model a timeline against some of the needs that we're going to have as a district, what are some of the things that we have to kind of backwards map, and what do we need to be doing now? So this is just really a picture to show what those pieces look like, and then during the facilities committee report this evening, we'll be talking a little bit more in depth of some recommendations that are coming out of that committee. But these are presentations that Michelle Weiberg and then the Findorf group had put together. So I'm going to let Steve kind of walk us through the highlights of those. These were probably hour-plus presentations each, we're not going to dive into that level of depth tonight. We'll hit the highlights of them and then certainly answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Randy. Just as a little background, as Randy mentioned, this presentation was put together by Michelle Weiberg. So back in 2014, for our last referendum, the school board selected PMA as our independent financial advisor after going through a request for proposal process. So just so you know, when you see Michelle's name or PMA, that's who this company is the company we've been working with since 2014. I'm really going to move forward and just cover a couple of slides that really provide the high-level information that all board members should be aware of as we begin this discussion around referendum planning. The first slide that I want to touch on is this one here that talks about the 2 referendum questions allowed per calendar year. But more importantly, as you're looking at long-term planning, a school board has 5 years to borrow the money following a successful referendum. So that means, potentially, if there was a successful referendum in the fall of 2020, the school board would have until the fall of 2025 to execute the borrowing. Okay, so that's the actual borrowings itself. From the time you issue debt, you have 3 years to spend the proceeds of each individual borrowing. So with most referendums, like the one we had in 2014, the borrowing was issued in multiple phases. Each one of those phases has to be tracked individually with a 3-year life cycle on them. So to maximize or stretch out a borrowing as far as possible, you could go up to 5 years to do the borrowing and then up to 3 more to actually spend the funds, which gives a total time frame of up to 8 years. Now in my time here in Waunakee, we've never even come close to this because we've always moved very quickly into construction after the majority of our referendums because we had significant space constraints when we were doing prior referendums. But for planning into the future, just know that this is the range of the possibilities as we look at referendum moving forward. One other slide that we spent some time talking about at the facility committee meeting was really the history of the property tax levy and tax rate going back to 2014. So why did we look at 2014 in this example? It's the last time we passed a referendum. So in 2014, the referendum was $44.8 million. When you help explain a referendum to the public, you project what you believe the tax rate might look like as a result of a successful referendum. What you see here is what actually happened since 2014, where the tax rate only increased to $11.60 after being $11.48 prior to the referendum. And we're sitting today at $10.86, which is below the referendum, pre-referendum level of 2014. Our school district community has experienced some pretty significant growth in property values. You can see in this middle section here, going back to the first increase from 2014 at 3.4%, we've had some very significant 5, 6, 7, and 6% increase in total property value. When you see increases in property value of that significance, it's going to drive down the tax rate in our community. So we have benefited as a school district from growth, property value growth throughout our community, which has generated a tax rate below what was projected during the 2014 referendum. So just keep in mind where we've been in the past, and as we move forward in future referendums, taking a look at what the percentage increase in property value is plays a major factor in what the actual tax rate ends up being. One piece of information that Michelle showed, talked us through, was where we are currently sitting in the interest rate cycle. This goes all the way back to May of 1999, and you can see there's been a few dips in the recent past, and we're near that right now. Obviously, no one can predict the future, but we certainly are in a overall positive borrowing environment. If you go back to May of '99, you can see a significant difference where we would have been borrowing around 5%. Even back here, you can see it approaching 6%. So currently, we are in a very positive environment. So any form of government that's out borrowing right now is able to take advantage of the fact that we are near historic lows for being able to borrow. So this is just something to keep in mind, that as of right now, it is a good time to be borrowing. This is probably the slide we spent the most amount of time talking through. And so I just want to explain the two columns. So scenario 1 describes taking a certain set of projects and breaking them up over 3 different referendum cycles in the next decade. Scenario 2 takes the exact same projects and breaks them out over 2 referendum cycles. And as you can see, when you get to the total overall cost, and that's between principal and interest, the scenario of breaking up the projects over 2 referendum cycles instead of 3 is about a $10 million cost difference. This was information that we had been wanting to prepare for quite some time, but needed to get further along with our facility planning process and our facility maintenance process to be able to put this together. But for the first time, we were able to see the actual differences between 3 versus 2 referendum cycles. And with the information that we learned earlier, we learned that in a referendum cycle, you can take up to 5 years to go ahead and issue the debt and 3 more to spend it. So knowing that this type of process would in the end cost the community fewer dollars, the facility committee started honing in more on this type of an approach and looking at putting together a planning process that ultimately in the end would be less expensive for our taxpayers. I think the most important thing to keep in mind about this is it is the exact same projects being viewed in 2 totally different ways with a $10 million savings between the 2. And I know, Dave, you started asking for this last fall to really try to articulate this out to see in writing what that might actually look like. So Michelle Weiberg had to build multiple financial plans to try to lay out these different scenarios to really show what that would look like. In addition to that, there is a different approach between the 2 scenarios for the impact on the tax levy itself. Now we know from this number, scenario 2 is overall less expensive, but there's a difference in the way you get to the tax rate. So scenario 1, the more expensive plan, ends up having a higher tax rate impact, which you would assume. Scenario 2 has a lower tax rate impact as it costs less. However, the increase is higher in scenario 2 in the short term, but lower in the long run.
That makes sense.
So you're looking at a little bit of a different approach. Scenario 1 has a lower tax increase in the short run, but it's more expensive in the long run. So when you're looking at the two differences, that's really fundamentally all you have to really look at is a little bit more of an immediate tax increase, but a longer term lower tax increase versus the opposite. Basically costs more, but upfront has a little bit of a lower cost impact. The other thing that is important to keep in mind is whatever financial advisor we would work with a potential referendum in 2020, it's important for the school board to work very closely with that firm to plan out your borrowings to minimize the debt as much as possible. And I'll give you an example. In a fall of 2020 referendum, one strategy that a school board could execute would be to have the cash flow borrowing in 2020 be taxable. That means the cash flow borrowing will cost us more than it otherwise would. But since that's only a $6 million amount and it is paid back within 1 year, you're not talking significant dollars. You could then spend or issue $10 million worth of long-term debt after the referendum passes and have the $10 million be tax-free, and that's now a 20-year payback. So the savings are significant. So a school district only has $10 million of tax-exempt borrowing that can occur each year. So a little planning on the front end helps us really maximize where do you want to use that 10 million. Do you want to use it up for your cash flow borrowing, which is just simply a short-term 1-year loan, or do you want to use it up towards a long-term debt schedule over 20 years? The best approach to take would be to plan ahead and try to maximize our $10 million for our taxpayers. We did that in 2014. So the 2014 referendum was in the fall. The school board immediately approved $10 million in debt at the December board meeting. But in order to do that, we had to plan ahead 6 months in advance, knowing our cash flow borrowing was going to be done a different way. And again, we did not know that the referendum would pass, but it was worth it to our community and our taxpayers to go down that path. The same thing could happen in 2020 if we wanted to plan that way. So that's an example of what you can do to try to minimize that immediate impact of the tax levy, is try to reduce that cost as much as possible.
Can you go back
Yep.
a second? I think there's an important part here that after looking back at it the past week or two, you see a $10 million difference between the two referendum concepts, but when you look at the overall cost, that's really about a 5% savings. Not too huge, but definitely something you should always do. But when you go down to the bottom and you look at the tax effect, it's a 35 cent difference. That's a 10% tax cut, basically. So by saving 5% on the referendum, we lowered the taxes by 10%. And that, to me, is something that, as we go forward with this, we have to really stay focused on, is, you know, when you look at it to what's going to happen to people within the Waunakee Community School District, you're talking, depending on which version you go with, a 10% tax difference. And that actually works out quite a bit. That I think, you know, when you look at the fact that, you're right, Steve, it's a little more front-loaded because of that 226 in 2022. But as we know, we can spread the 226 out over 5 years. But when you look at it, the whole difference between the one and the other is only a 5-year period. So if we spread that 226 out over 5 years, you in effect ended up at the same point no matter what. But the second one cuts the cost impact by 10%.
Yeah, to Dave's point, you see this dollar amount here. That's what your financial advisor would want to work very closely with the school board on, as to what are your goals for that. Do you want to spread it out as much as possible for your taxpayers? How much of the borrowing do you want to lock in? it's directly tied to your construction timeline. All of that has to work together. But there absolutely are ways to take that and spread it out. So to try to lessen the impact over time, which is the exact strategy that we used in 2014. You go back and look at what we did in 2014, the goal was to spread that debt out over a number of years to try to have it be, as far as for the taxpayers, basically back here, we wanted to try to make it appear as consistent as we could over time. Now again, we didn't predict property increases of that dollar amount, but we still had a common goal of trying to keep the tax levy and tax rate as consistent as we could back in 2014.
One other thing, Steve, I think your 97 cents under 2023 should actually move to 2026.
Okay.
Because you don't have that second referendum until 2026, right?
Yes, that's correct.
So that's
Yep, that
actually-
should come down.
That's 3 years too soon.
Yep. Yep. And then at the end, you just see some example referendum plans. But the main things we really wanted to cover today was just an understanding of really the laws as to how you can spread out the borrowing. The second thing was really what was our history with our tax rate and how did we manage the 2014 referendum. And then the third piece is what are those differences between 2 referendum cycles and 3? Were really the focus of this presentation when we met with the facility committee, and that was 2 meetings ago. Any questions at all on the PowerPoint from PMA?
Mark?
Well, just comment, it also, the 5 and 3 then also appears to diminish the overall indebtedness that we have too, so that it can be structured in a way that as our debt starts going down from the 2014 referendum, it's not all on top of it at once. You're spreading out over 8 years, which again to the local, not just community, but to our function as a district, the overall burden is less.
Right, great point. What Mark is referring to is a school district can only borrow funds for 20 years. So we have a revolving 20-year cycle. So every year that you can move debt into is a new year that currently doesn't have anything sitting in it right now. So when you look at a 20-year schedule, we only have debt out for X number of years, and then we have years with zeros and zeros and zeros. So as you move debt further down the road, you are freeing up a year in your debt service schedule that currently doesn't have anything sitting in it. So there definitely are advantages of spreading out a borrowing over time to take advantage of that.
So do we have some that's getting set to fall off then, by that 20-year premise?
Rebecca, would you mind pulling the PowerPoint back up? That's a great question.
'Cause we should. I've been
We
here
do have a slide.
Over 20 years, and I know we've,
So
Oh, no,
here
see, there you
is
go.
our existing debt service. So if you think about the fact that we can go out 20 years, you can go 20 years from where we're sitting in 2019 and go out to 2039 is what we're right now legally able to borrow. So we currently have 1, 2, 3, 4 years of zero on our schedule. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years that are sitting at a greatly reduced level, and then you can see where we're currently at. So the goal of any referendum borrowing plan is to take advantage of these drops and to take advantage of these
There you
years
go.
with zero. And to what you had said earlier, Mark, the further you can push it, the more years you start opening up that you can put debt into.
So what happens, we go after 125 and the wheels fall off the bus and you don't have to spend as much? What happens with that extra approval? After 5 years, it just goes away, or?
So, yeah, so After 5 years, it would go away, so the referendum vote would give the board the authority to issue debt. Then it is up to the board over time to actually approve the resolutions for the borrowing. So if at any point in time, the board did not authorize the full amount of the debt, that authority would just go away. Thank you, Rebecca. We're going to jump into this topic for a minute. This is some example timelines. So at the last facility committee meeting, we talked about this. If you could go to the second page, Rebecca. There's really just a couple of key things to point out on here. Planning ahead for a potential referendum in the fall of 2020 requires us to look at August 25th of 2020. That is the date under Wisconsin state law that the school board would have to authorize the referendum, have the language, and be completely ready to go. More likely, we would want to look at our August board meeting so that in the event we needed to hold a special meeting, we'd plan a little bit of time. So you've got the date of August. Everything up until that point is basically pre-referendum planning. Then you have the actual vote itself, which is on November 3rd. If successful, everything to the right of that is obviously your design and construction process. We spent a lot of time talking at the facility committee meeting about the planning process and the timelines that it would take up till August 25th of 2020. Especially some of the major topics like putting the team together, reviewing the work that we've already done to date, the scope review, and this really is one of the more complicated components of this planning process, is really identifying the scope of what might be included in a referendum. And then really, when you look at the refining options, is the second process that's the most time consuming. An example of refining options would be, what are the various options for the current middle school that would become a part of the high school campus? So this part of the process would be looking at the options that could exist in those two buildings working together as a campus. This part of the process is really what is even included. As you're looking at the scope of your referendum, as an example, look at something a little bit simpler, land. Is land included in the scope of a potential referendum in the fall of 2020 or not? If the answer is no, you move on, and that's not included in the process at all. So you have to take a look at that for the various topics that have been at least considered and talked about in the last several months.
I can just add something. These are just illustrative examples. When we met with Findorf, we threw everything up on the table, so you can see existing library. That's just a piece that just says, that's a piece, just like land, we have to say yes or no. But we threw it up there for illustrative purposes so that you could at least see kind of the scope that we have to kind of narrow down.
We're going to come back to this during the facility committee report for tonight's meeting, because the facility committee has a recommendation on the front end, which is to have a process for the selection of the partners for a referendum planning process. So later on tonight, during that committee report, we're going to be talking through that piece. If this piece were to last 6 months, that means all of the rest of this has to become condensed. And the challenge with condensing the rest of it is there's always a concern that you don't have as thorough of a vetting process as you would like. So the goal that you'll hear the committee talking about tonight is to have a process so that we all know what it is that we are doing for the selection of partners, but to have that process be efficient so that that process does not negatively impact these two parts of the timeline. So we're gonna come back to that a little bit later on tonight to really talk about how the selection impacts the rest of it. But you really just need to look at this from this side and this side as two different processes. Findorf did share a couple of scenarios for the opening of a new middle school that could occur on different timelines. So there's a couple of versions in here that you're welcome to take a look at, but it shows a couple of different options. All of that will need to be discussed in much greater detail at a later point in time, but it was just presented so you can have an idea to see that there's multiple different ways this could be approached. Any questions on the timeline part of it?
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is to look at our school district calendar for both the 1920 school year and the 2021
Right.
school year.
Great. Thanks, Joel.
Randy?
Again, we've worked with our calendar committee to really review these 2 years of calendars. The 1920, the next year's the 2019-2020 calendar is one that you've already approved. What I did add in here, particularly after we went through the snowy year that we did, was trying to articulate some of the snow day pieces. What I've articulated in here is really just that if we had a replicating process of what happened this year, of what would that actually look like from a snow day standpoint. If you want to go all the way over to the right, that side, there you go. This is exactly what we did this past year. I mean, when this is the first year we've really had to look at snow days with the respect under the new rules where you're not counting days, you're using hours of instruction, particularly as we've changed our hours with the addition of the intermediate school a few years ago. So the piece that I'm talking about with regards to this calendar are really up in this area. And it's how do you make up snow days and which ones do we make up? So it used to be before you had to look at two different criteria, your hours and your days. And they really were very different markers that precipitated different ways of when you had to make up days. So this is really one that is built off of looking at the current law for calendars and for schools on the hours of instruction. And per that, the recommendation that's came out of our committee is to look at really following the same process we did this year, that should we have 5, 6 snow days type scenarios, that this is where we start to make them up. Here's how we do that through building in a snow day makeup day during the spring, and then also any subsequent ones coming at the end of the year. And then any other ones earlier on, if we have 1, 2, 3, 4 snow days, that those would not be made up for the students and hence would not be made up with staff. So I think the piece that I liked about this, it doesn't get us into that really worrying about how far we're going into the end of the year, and also I really need to hold those days that we have for professional development as important to our work, because that certainly had an impact on us and some of the things we wanted to do with staff this year. So this is the 1920 calendar, very similar to what you saw when it came before, just kind of outlines the snow days. Rebecca, can I have you go to the next one? So this is one that is, you can leave it just like that. This is very similar. You see the same type of proposal for the snow day aspect. The one thing that's different here was I have heard over the last number of years as we've considered when is spring break going to be held. And I've held very firmly that we should just pick a week and that's where it should be. Well, there's always debate on which week is the right week. And how does that line up with other school districts and other places that are having spring break at different times. So this year, as a committee, we took a look and we surveyed the staff and we surveyed parents. So I found a 1-question, very quick survey, gets a very quick response from both. So you can see the results that were in your packet. I mean, there was over 1,000 parents that responded in a relatively short period of time. And then quite a few comments just with regards to really where those fall. But what you're seeing in front of you is either the 3rd week or the 4th week. And the recommendation from the staff and from parents was really a 4th week implementation of spring break. So that's what's added in here for this is the 2021 school year, correct, Rebecca? Just making sure I'm looking at the right one. Yep, 2021. So the question in front of you as far as the difference between these two is, do we like the 3rd week? There's benefits to it in respect that we're one of the few districts in the area that has the 3rd week. Majority of them have the 4th week. When you look at comments that came in from the surveys, many of it from staff were so that it lined up better with families that lived in other communities, worked here, and lined up where they could have better experience in that respect. And then really also from parents, I think it was a very similar type of a piece of just trying to align things with where they see other districts in the area fall. Now, certainly there were people who voted the other direction and liked it where we've had it, but for this, if we're gonna make a change, I wasn't gonna do it for next year. I wanted to give people ample notice, but based on the survey results, there is a desire to have that change to the 4th week. So that's really the only change that is difference between the 2 years. And I guess I would open that up for any level of questions that you may have.
So at the committee, there was the question concerning spring sports. We have Aaron here.
Oh.
Aaron, do
Yeah.
you want to weigh in on spring sports and how 3rd and 4th week would affect you?
Well, you have, the 4th week would actually work out well for a couple reasons that Randy did outline. Is a lot of schools are on break that week.
Okay.
So when we don't match up with that break, when we're looking for our schedule, a lot of them are, we need to move that game off of that week,
Okay.
off of week 4, and we move up to week 3. No, we can't because we're off that. And so it in effect almost blocks off 2 weeks where we really struggle with our schedule in spring sports.
Okay.
The other thing it impacts when we keep it in one spot is those sports in particular feel like, oh, we're always the one that has to deal with people being on vacation during the 1st week of practice, when we're trying to figure out when it's like in my office, Sue and Jen, who's on the team, who still needs a physical, who still needs to turn in paperwork, who needs to pay their fees. But we don't know because they said they were going to come up with the team, but they're in San Pedro or something like that for the week. So we'll see next week when they come. And so that puts a stress just on the efficiency and effectiveness of handling the paperwork side of the athletic department, and it puts a stress on our coaches, of course, as we have a highly competitive nature here in Waunakee of who is going to be on what team and what's the makeup of that team.
So you're saying that the 4th week really wouldn't be a negative impact?
No, I think it would. I think
Help.
people would welcome it.
Okay, thank you.
The state basketball tournament too, doesn't that sometimes get loused up the
Yes. So
3rd week?
traditionally what's happened is we have that, and I, from back here, I can't read the schedule up there, but week 3, that Friday is always parent-teacher conferences.
Yes.
And at the high school level, a lot of parents take that day already. They're like, no, we're just gonna start that as vacation day. Well, when we went to the state basketball tournament, that's when we're playing. So we have, the first year we had families that were, eating $1,600 in tickets, plane tickets and things like that because of it. And also, it looked really bad, just in my opinion, as an athletic director, and I always put our best foot forward when we couldn't have a band and we're 10 miles away from the Cole Center, and we didn't have enough kids for a band or a student section really. So
We didn't have
just
enough
kind of
kids
like,
and enough distribution of instruments.
yeah.
Thank you for that input.
So,
So you need a vote.
yeah, this is something that does need your action and approval.
Move approval of the school district calendars for the 2 years as submitted.
Second.
Any other discussion on the calendars?
Just a real quick comment, if
Yep.
there's any way we could make sure that these calendars then get uploaded to the website, that
Yes.
would be super, super great.
They will be,
Yeah.
yes. They will be, absolutely.
Our communication director can do
Yes,
that.
that's my first thing.
I will notice this will make it harder for us to get tickets to Disney. Because there'll be
What?
more students off.
Oh, yeah, and
Oh,
airline
yeah.
tickets will be more
It
expensive.
Just so you know.
It will impact some of us, but
Does.
I have the ballot reasons and we had good
Yeah.
votes, so.
And visit Lodi. We're changing it far enough in advance. I
Well,
think
Yeah.
we're,
I wanted to give a little
Yeah.
notice, and then,
Yeah,
I mean,
I think
I
that
thought
was
it was
good.
good to do the survey with parents.
Yep.
I mean, that was a pretty
was
act,
good.
within a couple of days, we had,
That's
pretty
good
mature answer.
response.
so.
Yeah. Okay, any
So,
other questions? or
Randy, if
concerns?
there's more than 6 snow days, and you
Keep-
just start looking at
You
other
keep going
Bite
in
your
there.
tongue.
development like we have.
You keep going, you keep
Yeah.
adding them at the end of the year.
Okay. so
We're
you
gonna
wanna
have
drop the
year-round
staff development
school.
or anything like that?
Would I,
Because you do have staff development in May, would that be a targeted daily?
I would really like to keep our staff development days where they are, because
Okay.
this year when we did some flipping with those,
Yeah, yeah.
it impacted our work.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it was the right thing to do this year when we were trying to figure things out, but it's not something I want to
So
use as
the plan is to extend the school.
if the plan, if, knock on wood, we don't have 6 snow days.
Right, right.
That's my hope,
I agree.
so.
that's a lot.
Okay, we have a
That's
motion on the
unbelievable.
table for the calendars. Any other comments or concerns? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Perfect, thank you. Administrative reports, consideration of purchase of the food service equipment.
Steve, I'll let you take that one.
So what you see tonight for your consideration is a purchase for the middle school. The reason why this is on the board agenda is this is over $25,000, so our board policy does require action individually on a purchase of this size by the board. This does not qualify as any exemption. As an example, we don't always bring Chromebook purchases to the board because we can purchase them off a state of Wisconsin contract. There isn't a state of Wisconsin contract for something of this type. So therefore, we do go out, receive multiple bids. You do see a memo from Connie Vaco, who is our Tahoe Director of Food Service, outlining the options in her recommendation. At the bottom, you see the additional costs for installation from Cooper and Westfall, leading to a grand total. There's some explanation from Connie as to why that is her recommendation. So we are needing to request school board approval on this item because the dollar amount exceeds the $25,000 figure. The cost for food service equipment is funded through our Fund 50, which is our food service program. So we do purchase all of our large equipment directly out of the food service fund itself. So that means it does not have any impact on the educational fund or Fund 10. We've been able to do that largely because we've had a successful food service program, which allows us to do these type of things out of our Fund 50 food service fund.
Make the motion to approve.
Yeah. Need a second?
Second.
Mark, any other discussion on that purchase? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Next, announcements and correspondence. It looks like we have some wonderful, wonderful recognition.
Yeah, some good news tonight. I mean, I forwarded to the board previously, but Rich Hellenbrand was recognized as one of the custodial maintenance employees of the year by WASBO. That's the Wisconsin Association of School Business Officials. Rich has been a part of making presentations on school safety, et cetera, at many of their conferences. So this is we all know Rich does a phenomenal job around here, and it's great to see some recognition for him in that respect.
And he works for Waunakee?
He does. I don't know why the first one came back, had him working in Montello. So that was, it's that business officials organization. It was, so I'll blame it on that. So, but yes, this one is corrected. He works here. And then the second one is really multi-level systems of support, or PBIS recognition for our middle school and heritage. As we've gone through this continual training, This is just recognition of kind of where they are in that implementation, and as you see us getting further into that process, I anticipate some of our other schools will also be receiving these in subsequent years as they kind of move forward. You can see the bronze, silver, gold, platinum levels is really years of activity and towards that work. So these are some of our early adopting schools that really work towards PBIS, so I anticipate we'll see hopefully some recognition in the future for our other schools, but congratulations to them for moving some positive things forward.
Thank you, Andy.
Yep.
Moving on to committee reports, starting with the Budget Committee.
Just a quick thing on the minutes, and I'll let Steve do it. Basically, the agenda items cover what we did in the, at our meeting. We went over the third drafts. He went through the joint finance impact and additional expenses that he'll be going through in a minute. We did focus for a couple minutes on the soccer stadium financial plan, and then the Ryan paper cut proposal. But since those are each itemized points on the actual agenda, we'll let Steve go through the details of those.
Thank you, Mark. Rebecca, would you mind pulling up the budget planning process update?
Is that this?
Thank you, yep. So I want to talk through this for a couple of minutes. We've got some great news from the governor's signing of the state budget last week. So the new information is in bold. So this was updated today, so this is different than what you see in your board book. So what we talked through at the budget committee is just a reminder that in our budget planning process, we were utilizing a per pupil categorical aid increase of $200 per student. The Joint Finance Committee came up with a different plan, which was a $25 increase in the per pupil categorical aid and a revenue cap increase of $175 per student. So still a total of $200. So our budget planning process was right on line with the $200. So as you noted, I said last week to the budget committee, as a result, there's no change. Well, last week, governor signed the budget and made a change as he approved the state budget process. So from the School Board Association, I copied this out. Compared to the $25 increase, which is what the Joint Finance Committee included in the budget, the governor's veto increased the amount $63 per pupil higher in 1920 and $38 higher in 2021. As a result, districts will be able to increase their spendable revenues by $263. So the 263 compares to the 200, so that is an additional $63 per student above and beyond what our planning process was estimating. That's a positive increase of about $260,000. I'm saying about because our third Friday count in September is a part of that process, and we won't know until we get through September. But this is a significant positive for public schools in Wisconsin to see additional revenues coming in as a result of the governor's veto. Being at $263 per student for public schools is a very positive change. This is something that has been well received by the education community, going from $263 and then also $242. I'll talk about special ed in a moment. But this was a significant positive change for schools as a result of the governor's veto. The special education aid was something I talked about with the budget committee as well. Rebecca, if you could scroll up a little bit. So the special education aid was what was put in through the Joint Finance Committee motion. Now this is well below what the governor initially put into his state budget proposal, but it was a move in the right direction compared to where state special education categorical aid has been. So basically, the Joint Finance Committee moved special ed categorical aid to 26% in 1920 and 30% in 2021, which is about $155,000 more in the 1920 budget planning process. So if you add the special ed aid and the per pupil aid to an increase in the mental health aid, it's about a $460,000 increase above what we had been planning for in our budget planning process. What's also positive about this is you can see between special ed aid and the per pupil aid, $275,000 is coming in the second year of the state budget for categorical aid, paired with the $242 in the per pupil increase. Both years will be very, very close to that dollar amount, above and beyond what school districts in Wisconsin were really planning for. So basically, the first year is more tilted towards the per student increase. Second year, more tilted towards special education aid, but between the two of them, somewhere in this kind of dollar amount in each year of the next 2 years.
In each year?
Each year. So very positive news for schools. This is certainly welcomed by school districts across the state of Wisconsin. Just a very positive picture compared to the recent past, and it definitely generates some additional revenues. Any questions at all about the revenue side and what the governor did last week and anything along that end?
So are you saying we get an extra $460 a year?
Yes, and then next year it'll be about the same. So the second year of the biennium, it'll be a little over $900,000 above and beyond what we would have been planning for. So definitely a positive situation for schools. Rebecca, if you wouldn't mind scrolling up for a little bit. We did talk at the committee level about some expenditures that have kind of been discussed over the last couple of months. There's been no decisions made on any of these, but the budget committee does want to bring this back to the August budget committee meeting and talk some of these things through. We do have a social worker position posted, just to talk about that for a little bit and why we're recommending that. First of all, there's a long-term goal in student services to have a 1.0 FTE in each of the schools. Secondly, the state budget is doubling the amount of funding available for social worker FTE from $3 million to $6 million. So school districts that really plan ahead and are able to capture that increase in spending are able to put in a claim for the $6 million. Only districts that claim the funds receive a reimbursement. We were one of the districts that planned ahead and were able to capture those funds in the 18-19 fiscal year. We're also going to be able to capture those funds in the 19-20 fiscal year. Adding an additional social worker would allow us to increase resources for the 2020-21 school year. So basically, as the state of Wisconsin is investing additional dollars in social workers, we have been planning right alongside the state in adding social worker time to take advantage of the fact that there are those funds available. Not all schools are doing that. In fact, quite a few schools, the majority did not participate in the $3 million that was available. We'll see if it changes now that it changes to $6 million. So the committee motion was to approve the third draft of the budget, but also move ahead with the interview process for the social worker hire. So just keep that in mind when we get to the third draft. Joan?
Steve, are those monies from the state for the social worker, are those one-time money or ongoing money?
Rebecca, you want to scroll back up to the previous slide for a minute? Or previous page? I'll talk about that a little bit. You can keep going back up. Right here, perfect. So Joan's question is that one-time money or how does that work? So the thinking behind this aid for school mental health services is that you can capture on a one-year basis the increment or the additional expenditures from one year to the next, including pay raise that people would be getting. Put that together in a claim form to receive a one-time reimbursement. It is paired with the concept that a percentage of the social worker's salary is eligible for special education categorical aid. So I think the main thinking from the state behind this concept is what stops a lot of districts in being able to invest in student services is that you don't receive a percentage of your funding until the year after. So this is designed to step in and provide funding on a shorter term basis. And then you also receive categorical aid on social workers. So the advantage of looking at a social worker position right now is you actually will get both. So it's a real positive. In fact, I know Kurt has shared with members of our administrative team that there's more and more districts looking at social workers in lieu of guidance or other positions in their district because they are able to be, at this point, reimbursed under both programs. So, thank you, Rebecca, if you want to scroll back a little bit. So just keep in mind page 2. Keep in mind that the Budget Committee recommendation on the third draft of the budget includes the interview process moving forward with that on the social worker. The Budget Committee previously approved posting a job in anticipation of the state budget moving in this direction. So we've got some expenses that the Budget Committee's working on right now, and we'll come back to that in August. But one other thing that I really wanted to touch on is the tax levy increase. So when the state funding formula for schools switches from a per pupil aid to a revenue cap increase, that changes the property taxes across the entire state of Wisconsin for schools. The reason for that is the per pupil funding approach is completely funded by the state of Wisconsin in a payment to each school. So whenever funds are added to the per pupil aid, the taxpayers don't notice it because it is a direct payment to schools. So whether you live in Waunakee or Brookfield or Boscobel, the tax impact is the same, which is 0. However, the Joint Finance Committee motion split the $200 per student increase to $175 on the revenue cap. That then changed the taxation across every school district in Wisconsin. So we had to wait for the July 1st equalization aid estimate from the DPI to see what did that look like in Waunakee. So that came July 1st. The estimate from the DPI was $20,738,000 or $962,000 higher than what was projected in the third draft of the budget. However, the shift to a revenue cap increase instead of the per pupil aid increases the revenue limit formula by $722,000 approximately. Because property taxes in Wisconsin basically work with revenue cap minus equalization aid equals the taxes, we actually are one of the districts benefiting from this shift this year, in that the increase in equalization aid is greater than the increase in what our revenue limit can go up, which means our property tax levy has to drop. So the way that formula works is you've got this dollar amount going up, that's higher, which means that has to be lower. So across the state of Wisconsin, schools are looking at this right now and trying to figure out what did that $175 per student do to the tax levy in each district. Our case, it's positive. districts that don't receive high levels of state equalization aid are right now looking at this and are realizing their tax levy just went up. So it's a very different way of looking at school finance, but it's important to understand here in our community, what did the 175 per student on the cap, what does that mean? For us, it means that we're gonna have a lower tax levy than we would have otherwise. That's the bottom line. Now, this number will change. Every district has to report budget numbers into the DPI. Come August, at the end of the month, we have to report actual information. The actual information from districts all across the state is collated together, so this figure will change. It's unlikely to change by a large degree. So any questions at all on how the taxes work with equalization aid and the revenue limit formula? Jack?
Just a question on the budget. Is it a done deal now, or are the Republicans still considering veto override?
So as of last week, Wednesday, when the governor made his veto changes, from the governor's perspective, this is done. Now, the question is, how do I don't know, Dave, you're more of an expert in this than I am. Do you see that changing?
No. There may be an attempt at a veto override, but it doesn't sound like there will be. And even if there was an attempt, the votes aren't there. So they don't have a 2/3 majority to override what the governor did. So
Thank you.
there's,
Good, thank you.
Steve, could you just send the board members this updated copy of your?
It's in your folder.
It's in, duh, thank you.
That's all right.
Got it.
With the bold parts.
Yes, with the bold parts. Thank
So,
you.
just to be clear, so this is all updated information. It's not included in the third draft of the budget.
Got it.
That's why the budget committee wants to meet in August to have a fourth draft put together.
Good idea.
So the recommendation tonight from the budget committee is to request approval of the third draft of the budget without this information, including the moving forward with the interview for the social worker, and then coming back at the August meeting to incorporate all of this information. So that's where the budget committee's recommendation, Mark.
And if, there was one other expense up there that we, for the scoreboard, volleyball begins and we'll need a scoreboard by the end of August. So we did give Aaron permission to proceed to find advertisers to help us watch that $32,000 cost, but we're gonna have to get the scoreboard, have it installed, and so we wanted to move that process ahead. And so he's been informed to go ahead and do that. But the rest we've held back on.
I think we're in the process of working through that. I guess the one
Yeah.
amendment to the third draft of the budget, if that's amenable, would be that if we get to the point prior to before the next board meeting, giving us the, since that dollar amount is above our authority to approve, to allow us the authority to move that forward at the point when that's available.
Right.
Thank you. So should we vote on that third draft of the amendment?
with the amendment.
With the amendment, yeah.
I would make the motion to approve the third draft of the budget with the amendment to give administrative staff the authority to approve up to $32,000 to replace the field house scoreboard once they get all the information.
Second.
Any other questions or discussion on the third draft of the budget or the amendment? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
I'm opposed.
You're opposed?
Yes, I don't have a good understanding of the communications director, so, and I think there's a lot of people outside that don't have a good understanding as well, to spend $80,000.
But our motion
Doesn't include
for,
that.
doesn't approve that position yet.
Yeah, the third draft doesn't include that.
No.
Right, it doesn't approve the communications director.
Then I vote in favor.
That's correct. That's want
Okay.
to clarify that, Steve. Communications director, is that articulated in the third draft, or how is that
I
articulated?
thought it was.
It is.
I thought 50%
It was put into the
50.
third draft.
50%?
50% was put in.
50%, not.
Right, and
No.
our motion last month was to try to go to 100%.
Pending
Yes,
budget,
but
pending
that's not
budget
in the
approval.
third draft yet.
So we already approved the 50% back in the second draft, didn't
No.
we? No?
We approved it pending budget availability, which
Full-time.
full-time is what the
Right.
board approved. And that's a piece that I think we would bring back into the fourth draft of the budget. But what,
we've
just
never-
for clarification, the third draft of the budget has the halftime
It
position.
still does, because I asked about that
Right,
specifically.
thank you. So it's got the
At the
halftime,
committee.
but right now, it's, right, so that's what's in there right now is the halftime. So that's probably still rewrite.
So you're still no?
I know.
Okay.
You're
Yep. Got it.
It's okay.
We'll work together.
I got a fun feeling that'll be discussed in the fourth draft of the budget.
I'm sorry.
That's gonna be discussed in the fourth draft of the budget.
Yeah.
I got a question. So we approved that, this rhyme paper cut proposal, is this a good time to talk about that, or is this, what is it?
So that's the next.
That's
item.
coming up.
That is the
We haven't
next
talked
item.
about that yet.
Yeah.
So,
Tell us all about it, Steve.
yeah, Steve,
Do I want
go.
to wait till?
Oh, we
Oh,
haven't finished the vote.
yeah.
You're
Yeah.
We're
absolutely
still in the
right.
third,
Thank
yeah.
you.
Oh, sorry about that.
I think we
I'm on.
did finish it, and everybody approved except
Except
Jack.
Jack and Hook.
Yeah. We're-
So,
That's correct.
we're all done
You're right.
with
Yes.
the vote.
Okay.
So now we are on to the
Rhyme paper
Brian
cut.
paper cut.
So what I put in your notes was the budget committee is recommending delaying consideration of this proposal for a later date. The committee's recommending a pilot program of a print management system, this one's happened to be called Paper Cut, in one of the school buildings and seeking staff input before looking at this on a district-wide basis. So therefore, I didn't include the attachments, but they are included in the budget committee meeting for anyone who's interested. So Jack, to answer your question,
I did look at them, and it looked like there was a cost savings, right, from a copying standpoint?
yeah, so
I was trying to understand that a little
yeah, the intent behind print management systems is to have a return on investment for cost savings, just because of the different strategies that are put in place with the software. As an example, one of the features of the software is a system where you actually go up to the printer itself or copier with your district badge to scan it before your copies come out, which will eliminate a lot of copies that just end up being copied and never picked up. Another thing that the print management system does is it'll present you with a pop-up that will say, do you really intend to print this on the color copier? So as an example, if someone accidentally picked the color copier without being aware of the fact that it costs twice as much, it pops up a window and says, was that your intent? If it wasn't, you hit no and it redirects it to a black and white. Another example is the print management system has the ability to electronically route copies to our least expensive machines, which are the ones out here in the copy center. Right now, it is a paper-based routing system, which is inefficient for staff. You have to print out a form, kind of handwrite on it what it is that you want to have done. That form then gets put in your school mail. It takes time to get out here. A print management system allows us to tie together all of the devices. So potentially a staff member at the high school can print directly to the copy center and have their work back. So it has a lot of features that are designed to be cost-saving measures. So what we're looking at doing is investing in a print management system in lieu of additional equipment. However, one of the things the committee did recognize is that a print management system is a change process. And before just launching that district-wide, the thought was, let's pilot this in a school to really see how it works and obtain feedback from staff before just launching it out district-wide. Mark?
In reading what we had approved, I still have a concern that we have a pilot program set up before staff have even heard about it, and administration have actually heard from the company itself. And I would much rather be able to have administration and teachers hear from the company what it is before we establish a pilot, and to find out if there's a viable support from the support staff. I embrace and pleased with the potential for cost savings on supplies, but I think those who are going to be most affected by the system need to hear about it before even the pilot starts or is set up, to make sure that it's something that makes sense to them. And so I would much rather go in that process than what it appears that we're going to set the pilot and then have the teachers hear about it and then make a decision.
Really?
The concern is for how it backs up how staff is used to doing business. And so if you have to now show up at the printer, swipe your badge to get your copies, now you're standing at the machine while it's burping them out,
Yeah.
for example, as opposed to
Yeah.
just having them ready. And 3 teachers do this at once.
Right.
Now you're standing there with 2 other teachers, who swiped their badge first and who's standing there, and how does that affect your prep time? So-
And student use as well.
And not saying we shouldn't do it, it's just the potential impacts for how staff is used to doing it. We need more input from them before we just say this is the way to go. I think.
I agree with, some of Steve's comments. I've seen copiers you get
Yeah.
in paper.
There's
that
no doubt.
Nobody's ever
Yeah.
picked up because, there's no accountability. What this is doing is putting accountability into the system, and I think kind of tracks, what we're trying to do as far as move money to budgets.
Yep.
And, you're
Yeah.
responsible for your budget, and if, your team, somebody in there is doing more than maybe what they should.
But for example, if I've got a class of 30 students and they're going to send down their final drafts to be printed off, if they do that, and I'm not sure that happens anymore. The staff could tell us that, but you could potentially have 3 classes of 30 kids all going down at the same time. All of a sudden, you've got half a class going for 20 minutes because they're in line waiting to run their individual card off. And, I mean, if the system has a fail-safe to prevent that, that's great. I think our administration needs to hear from the representatives, as well as a representative group of teachers, to understand how it works and then why a pilot would be worthwhile. Otherwise, to me, it's a top-down thing that will save us money, but it's going to be so dysfunctional that the ranker's not going to be worth it.
I agree. It sounds like, so is the intent to start this pilot day 1 of the school year at a school?
That was not the intent.
Yeah, we
Okay.
actually have this topic on the admin cabinet agenda for Wednesday
Okay,
to just discuss it without any preset plan that it needs to be done at a certain date.
okay. I like Mark's idea that we need to have more lead time to start this out.
I think the other thing we need a better defined, Mark brings up a good point, better define what is our cost of those.
sitting in Heritage and the least expensive printers out here, you know, how does that person now get his materials back to Heritage if they're anticipating? I was gonna go to this printer and just pick it up, you know, so obviously teachers have to be more thoughtful and forward planning on how to use this system as well. So it wasn't quite as well defined, I think.
And those were similar questions at the committee level. Who's training the staff in how to do this and how it works? And what's the lead time to get everybody up to speed in terms of what the goals are and
This is all a logistics piece. This is a new product coming out of our vendor that we thought we'd bring forward, and it's really a matter of kind of change process and logistics.
Are we using this vendor in some other?
They're our vendor for our copy machines.
So yeah.
So what they did, what they did, they came up, basically, we have a certain amount of money budgeted for printer replacement. And they said because of the condition of our printers, for the cost that we could replace them, we could actually install the system that would save us over time. And then we start using that, the replacement numbers in year 2. But the issue is timing.
And it wasn't clear to me, I'm not sure whether their cost-saving estimates even took into consideration the cut down on the amount of paper. It was just the equipment process. So potential cost savings could be even more, but we need to work with staff.
4 years.
So this is going to come back to budget. So this is just informing us what's going on, and I think we just have to.
We were actually going to pull it from the agenda because there's no action, but we kept
Right.
it there for an informational
And I
item
think
for
it's good
tonight.
to hear about
Yep,
it
yep.
initially, but there's a lot of questions, so we'll wait to hear that. Moving on to policy.
All right.
Without, Mike,
I'll
you're
take it.
gonna take that?
We had a couple different items that we had for the policy committee. The first one was the policy services. At a previous meeting, we had reviewed options that were presented from WASB with regards to different ways we could approach review of our policy book. The policy committee didn't have time earlier this summer to really discuss the options that were presented. At our last policy meeting, we did have that opportunity, and the recommendation that is coming out of the committee is to look at option 2 from the document that is attached. That includes really a quick view of our policies to look for compliance on the areas that we need to have policy in place, and then also a piloting program for us to review and update our 100 and 200 series policies as a way to have us looking at some of their other resource guides. The committee thought this was a positive option because it gave us the quick review piece along with really a process to start to review our policies. The 100 and 200s are the board's policies and administration. So that would be really a body of work for this coming school year, and then give us a picture of what that could look like moving forward. So that's the recommendation coming out of the committee, and looking for consideration of the full board tonight.
So,
Motion to approve.
Second.
any other questions or discussion on doing that? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Second item we have here is a second reading of our purchasing policy. This is a policy we've had conversations at both the budget committee and the policy committee. This is regards to our change in language with regards to gift cards. So you saw this last month as a first reading. It's back for a second reading, so we do need a recommendation or an action item on this.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you.
Okay. The next item is a first reading, so there's no action this evening. One of the pieces that is a right of our parents is if they have an evaluation that we do that they don't agree with for educational services, mainly for special education services, et cetera. They do have the ability to go out and receive an independent educational evaluation. This is policy that just articulates both the process for it and how to request it. So this is a new policy that Kurt put together with regards to that body of work, but putting some policy in that we did not have previously. So there's no action on this evening. If you have any questions, Kurt is here. He would be able to answer them for you.
I do have a quick question of clarification. So I'm just curious, is this only special ed level, or what about a diagnosis like dyslexia? Or something that would require accommodations as, do we screen for those kinds of things?
Yeah, the policy is limited to special education
It is.
evaluations. It comes out of federal and state law in regards to special ed evaluations and process and procedure. Yeah.
I just was interested because when you read it, then it does say to identify learning disabilities. So there are learning disabilities that exist, that maybe your child's not delayed enough.
Our process is that we pretty much run all evaluations as special ed evaluations, and if they don't qualify under special education, then we'll turn it into like a 504
Okay.
evaluation.
That was the question.
Except the evaluation is already done because we did it on the special ed side of it. We do it from a practical matter just because
Okay.
it's easier to do it that way than to do the 504 evaluation and to
And
kick
then
it to
bump it
special
up.
ed.
Correct.
It's easier to go
Got it.
down to a 504 than up to a special ed eval, process and procedure wise. So.
Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you, Kurt. There are no other suggestions, then we'll bring this back at the August meeting for a second reading and consideration. And then the last item we have is elimination of a few policies. As state law continues to change with regards to how we need to administer really programs that aren't housed within our system but are at the tech college or college level. We don't have course and youth options any longer. That's all housed under a different title. So these two policies can be eliminated. So just look for a motion to eliminate these policies from our booklet.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Super. Thank you.
Facility committee.
Oh, I'm gonna let you have this one.
You're gonna let me take this one?
It's
All right.
long.
All right, I think between Steve and I, we'll tag team on this one. The pieces that we've been reviewing with the facilities committee, starting off with really there's two pieces that are related to soccer. One of the aspects that we've had Rattler Corporation and Rich Riggs reviewing for us is the condition of our current soccer field. And part of why we had this completed was one is that it is on our long-range facility plan as pushed out to like 2023-ish, somewhere in that neighborhood. That was based off an original report that Rich Riggs did when we first started working with him, probably 6 years ago. It really was kind of a surface level with regards to how is our grass growing and kind of what are our priorities that we have. And the soccer field was really our next item to really review, but it was really placed on our plan with a broad range of that 2023 timeframe. When we also took a look at the soccer field assessment, we wanted to make sure we did this in a similar manner to how we assessed Warrior Stadium when we went through that process. So we brought in Rattler Corporation and Rich. They looked at this from really two different perspectives, one from a kind of a growing grass type of an assessment, and the second one, which was Rattler's, which was a much more deeper dive, was really looking at all the soil conditions and all the infrastructure and construction of that field. And that's really what the report is pointing out, is that the condition of the field is a bit more grave than what we initially had indicated per where it was placed on our long-range plan. And really what they've come up with is that the soil conditions are very much made up of clay, which are very compacting. We also don't have an under drainage, and we don't have a crown that is sufficient to really deal with water. So the end of the report is stating that the feeling that this is a field that needs to be addressed in the short term. It is also an issue that because of that, it's the driver of this is how it's managing water. So when it rains, we have a rain event, it's causing significant challenges for folks like Aaron, who are basically trying to run events on it when the water is holding versus getting off. So that is the issue that we're having. So this is the Rutler's recommendation was that this be on our short list of things that we do in the very near future. And they've thrown two really broad level costs out there. One is about $800,000 to replace it as a grass field. That would really remove the soils that are there, put in new soils, and then do the proper drainage, crowning, under drainage, all of the things, and irrigation. And then they also threw in a number, I believe it was $1.2 or $1.3 million to do that for a turf field, a synthetic turf field. This was really an informational item for the committee. There was no action taken on it other than that we really want to dive in a little bit deeper to understand the differences between Rutler's report and Rich Riggs' report. They have a little bit of discrepancy as far as what they've looked at, but we want to rectify that. And then also really have an understanding of kind of what this actually means as we move forward. Part of the conversation it really precipitates is, as a fundraising group, is looking to improve the site for soccer in our community. What does that mean with regards to any contribution that the district would put towards that? We've been kind of paralleling pieces with Warrior Stadium. And at that time, we had kind of drawn a line as far as what we would fund or not fund. That's a conversation that we would still need to really kind of outline in this respect. It really falls into kind of the master planning conversation, which is the next agenda item. And I think there were a couple pieces that were related to this. First of all, was where do when we take a look at the master plan and the conversation about raising funds for this field from the community's perspective, for the community group's perspective, they're looking for some guidance on what processes would be appropriate as far as to raise the funds. What you saw in a previous board packet, and which is included here, is really the plethora of options that other districts and communities have used. The committee took a look at really what we used for fundraising options for Warrior Stadium, and felt that generally they felt that that was a good place to start. And so their recommendation was for a conversation around this table, really based around what would the board be comfortable with. But the committee was landing upon really donor recognition on a scoreboard, a donor wall, certain areas of fencing that are on the perimeters of the soccer field, pennants from the lights that are similar to like what baseball did, and then something unique to soccer, and I'm not sure if this is the correct word, it's a kick plate, but it's an area that's along the bleacher side of the field, which is a small structure that keeps the ball from rolling into the bleachers, etc. And there could be an advertising options along that. So the committee generally felt that that was a place to at least start the conversation, but wanting to take a look at really what the feelings of the board were with regards to latitude for fundraising. I mean, certainly the range is from naming rights to things on fields, etc. And generally the committee felt that really staying more closely aligned to what we did with Warrior Stadium was a place of comfort. So, but wanting to open that up for conversation. Did I hit the highlights, Dave?
Why are you looking at me? I think that's the biggest thing on the committee was, again, looking at Warrior Stadium and not trying to turn it into a version of a NASCAR. person walking by with all the tags on their jacket. When we discussed with the group, they seemed open to anything. And obviously was it Rattler, provided this place of what everybody else has done. Well, I don't think there's a place in the district where we have named anything after an individual or group. And so, to us, that seemed a significant thing to make sure we don't start that process. Looking at the kick plates, they are something that isn't anywhere else, but we do have, some things along the fencing of the edge of Warrior Stadium. And when we talked with the fundraising group, our concept was, yeah, you can use the kick plates, but let's not do all 52 of them. Because again, what?
48.
Was it 48? I know it was 52. 48, 50. Yeah, they could do 48, not all 52. I think we were looking at maybe a third to half. Again, trying to avoid, they showed a nice picture of one where they did every one of them, and I felt like I was looking at the back of Mallard's baseball field, where every single piece of wood is covered with an advertisement.
What side is that on the kick plate? Is that on the player's
That's
side?
right
or
in front of the
side?
state, right in front of the bleachers.
Oh,
It would be on the,
oh, I got it.
Person's
Okay,
side.
so
Person's
that's
side.
on the
You'd be seeing
bleacher
it.
side.
Right.
Got it.
is there, and I don't want to interrupt you, but is there a time limit to how long your name gets listed? Or
Yes, they had like 3 years and 2 years, and they had different levels where you could, in effect, get 2 or 3 of those kick plates for 2 to 3 years, so that your name would be in various locations. They had some options like that. So I think the biggest thing they need to know is what can they go tell people is available. And we pretty much took it that it's, a third to half percentage of those kick plates, and exactly what we do with every other sport, which is the pennants, the scoreboard, the donor wall.
So you guys discussed some of the banner concept as well, and so with baseball, is that strictly donors, or is that also advertising on the banners
Well,
for the
It's-
lights?
depends on how you feel
That's
about
another
it.
issue.
If you put a
Yeah.
donor name up there, is it advertising when it says Findorf?
Yeah, yeah.
Or when it says?
It's really an advertising piece, is really what those are. I mean, those are paid for.
But we do have individual donors on the baseball banners or not?
No, they're usually
Or
companies.
are they on the flag, on the donor wall?
The individual people are on the wall.
Okay.
It's mainly
All right.
businesses and corporations that are up on.
Although that wouldn't preclude an individual person from
There's just the
putting their
Right.
pet dog's name up on
Do
the
you have
banner.
a, do you have a price range? Do you have a price range? What
They-
qualifies to get on?
There is a
Yeah.
price range and it's.
If you look at the attachment sheet, it gives those prices for the
So I
various.
could put my son up there.
If you wanted to, you could, yeah.
But so in theory then, what the committee has told them is that for those limitations as a starting point of discussion, and all of those viewed as ads would be time-based.
Right.
Right.
all time-based? Are the pennants in the baseball, are those time-based?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
I like that.
Yep.
So basically, it's the goal, the fences by the goal
Right.
posts, and then the
Kick plate, and then the scoreboard and the pennants,
Scoreboard.
and then the donor wall. Right.
So it's very similar to.
I mean, there was supposedly a large donor who said, well, if you allow me to name the building, that'd be great. But I think the general feeling is no.
Right.
But they need an absolute answer from us so that they can start
Fundraising.
putting names.
What we also laid out there, and that's kind of the next step of this, is kind of what does all this look like timeline-wise? How does all this stuff line up? So if we give permission for them to move forward with now this level of kind of recognition or selling those aspects of it, the fundraising piece, what does this kind of look like timeline-wise? So if you look at and this is something that the board has to decide, so this is for illustrative purposes only, but if we were to say we are going to do the work on the soccer field next summer, so you back that out. So that work, then you're gonna have that work would probably start right when school is out, end of May, beginning of June. In order to do that, you're going to have contractors on board where you're voting in April. So that means there's a point where you've got to decide, are we going to have a grass field or a synthetic field? It's very similar to what we did with Warrior Stadium, when we bid it out both ways. So if we follow a similar process, that means that there is a point between this summer and fall where we get more specific drawings done that do two alternatives, a grass field and a synthetic field. You have a cost. As part of what this group also needs to look at is kind of what are we trying to raise? And a conversation that we have to have around this table is, given the report that we have from Rutler, we have some work to kind of dive into that a little bit deeper. What level of commitment does the board feel that there should be with regards to us contributing towards it? And the question that Jack asked is then, where's those dollars coming from? So we have, those are some pieces that we have to have some conversations between Facilities Committee, Budget Committee, and then bring some of those ideas back to the full board. But if you look at it from a timeline perspective, there are things that we put those pieces in place and we solve those questions. We then have some things that we would have to do to get actual bid costs, and then also look at the timeline as far as when would the fundraising group have to have their dollars. So that's coming up probably in the March-ish timeframe to give us the ability to have a vote on any level of a project for April for it to be in place to take off for next summer. That's kind of backwards mapping it.
Well, the other,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
the other, I guess, piece in terms of synchronizing the efforts. With the football field, there was a known entity of what we had to do, and it was planned to be done. The easiest thing for planning for them would be, don't plan on anything for the field and build your structure, because that was the thing that came with to begin with. In the hopes that, well, we're going to contribute something towards the field, but depending the cost and what we feel, where we can put it, budgetarily, financially, 800,000 is a lot of money all of a sudden to come up with that we weren't planning, and maybe there's a hybrid between the Rutler and the rigs that might bring that number down somewhat, but that becomes a critical piece of the plan, because I would assume if we're going to put in a field, structurally there's a way to do it better or not so well, as you're talking about a building structure there.
Right.
So which one needs to be done first in order to mitigate costs in that regards? And so that's a big piece. What are the actual costs for the field, and when can we, how do we fit that into our facility planning?
Right. And the one piece I would say is at the point when we do the field, we need to really follow a quality field construction. I mean, as we look at kind of our whole fields pieces that we've done, we've redone a number of fields over the period of time, from baseball to softball to now soccer. These are areas that we have to, I think we make sure we do it the right way so that we hopefully don't fall into that. So then that includes some of the under drainage, et cetera. But that's a bigger conversation. But really tonight, it's really looking at trying to give this group the latitude to get as early a start as they can on fundraising, give them some latitude of what we're generally comfortable with, and then we have some work to do to really start to define some of the other pieces so that we can communicate to them really what the landscape looks like. I think, Jack, you had a comment too.
Yeah, I think looking at the fundraising, the building is about $500,000 or in that range, and it sounded like they had commitments of $500,000, so they could potentially go ahead and build the building.
Right.
And we did have a conversation saying if we didn't have the funding or they didn't have the funding in place, could they put their field off another year? And they indicated, obviously that's not desirable. However, they could do that. They would continue raising the
They wanted the building first also. In fact, their goal was to start the building in spring. So it's done before the field starts. And they're already at $570,000.
Right.
So they have enough to already do the building. And that's the
What was
money.
the overall cost of the building?
They were projecting like 5. I think the number they had in there was high.
But the team center, I just see the pledge amount here, I don't see what the real, I don't have the rate.
It was,
It was in the,
But they've raised 570 without even doing any of the advertising yet.
Right.
So, it's, honestly, we're gonna have to see how far they go, and we're gonna be looking at them in December and January and making a decision. They're gonna have to make a decision, we're gonna have to make a decision about whether the building goes forward at that point. Because for them to do a building in spring, they need to be bidding
Right.
in January. So,
Julie?
It's just frustrating, because to me, the field's way more, way bigger priority than the building. But if the fundraising's already been done based on the fact that it's a building, I don't know what we can do about that. I guess
But I think-
my other question is, what percent of time, is that field used much by community?
not right.
I would have to.
Not so much.
I'm gonna
that
put
way.
Aaron on the spot.
I
Is,
don't think
is the soccer stadium used outside, by the community outside of our teams?
The stadium is very rarely used.
Okay,
And when I say maybe, I mean maybe a single game or two a
Okay.
year. Because of sort of the reasons outlined by both Rich and Rutler, we just, with boys soccer in the fall and girls soccer in the summer,
right.
there's not a lot of time in between to grow any grass, because girls soccer ends in June, boys start practicing in August. We've got a 6-week period to hit it, to get it ready to go for the boys season.
So like the community leagues, they use the practice field on the other end, or that lower field that's down
Yeah,
by the
they will use-
softball field, and,
Yep, they'll use the 2 practice fields or the bowl, and that's where WASC will go, just right now on those fields.
and, you know, again, it brings it back to your earlier point, Dave. If we do have community groups using other fields that we are responsible for maintaining, another way we could free that up is to convince the village that, you know, don't bother us about the tennis courts, and we won't bother you about all the other fields and courts. I mean, it's not, it shouldn't be a tit for tat, it should be, we should realize we're all the same taxpayers. I mean, honestly, we are. It doesn't matter which pot it comes out of, but
but the Waunakee.
it's silly
But
to me when the
WASC
community
is
and the
not
school
village.
districts.
The Waunakee soccer club is not part of the village.
Right.
That's something, they don't organize that. That's a totally different nonprofit organization. So, and one
It's
of
a
the
community
things,
group, though.
but,
But
But-
it's not
but-
the same as the tennis courts.
right, it's not the same as the tennis courts. But one of the things, you know, I think we've got to be careful with, the Waunakee area soccer club is going to donate to this field, and now you're gonna see increased use on
okay.
that field.
Good, got it.
Which
Yeah.
is gonna wear it out faster than if we just had our kids play, the school programs play.
I think we're looking at the same situation as we did with Warrior Stadium. If we go with the grass field, we are not increasing the time use of the
Stretching
field,
it out.
and we have to understand that. So if we go with the grass field, we're probably on our own. You know, the artificial turf is the only reason the money and the other groups would be involved with it, because Waunakee Area Soccer Club is not gonna gain a minute of playing time if we go with the grass field.
Right.
So why would they drop $200,000?
I see.
Right.
And that's a decision we're gonna have to make
Right,
based
right.
on where the fundraising ends up.
So tonight we want to give them direction on what we
Fundraising.
will accept for fundraising. So, you know, I like the parallel with what we did for
Yep.
Warrior Stadium and what's outlined here and what the facility committee has,
So a motion
discussed, so we need a
to
motion.
approve the committee's recommendation on advertising for.
Right.
Is it a
soccer.
motion?
Yes, that's my
Okay,
motion.
I'll second it.
Any other discussion on that? Good discussion about this project. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Oh, we have another thing
Yeah.
from facility. You guys spend a lot of time.
Busy,
You're
busy,
busy.
busy.
We had lots of fun.
Do you want to do that one, Dave, or want me to take it?
Well, this one's fairly simple. Basically, as you saw with the referendum timeline, the biggest part is selecting the partners who are gonna help put together the draw up of the referendum. And the shorter we can make that time frame, the more time we have for figuring out what we're gonna put in the referendum. So the committee discussed how are we gonna select this time. Last time we did interviews for the major parts. So we interviewed for the architectural firm and we interviewed for the general contractor. Now there, we did it as a total open, so we just put the request for proposal out and everybody who wanted to bid it did. And then we took all of those, cut it down to a smaller group and interviewed the ones that seemed the best fits. This time, the committee's recommending that we do an invite-only process, because that will be able to allow us to do it on a tighter time frame, and we won't have to spend as much time going through people who didn't really seem to fit our community last time. So the idea was to invite only those who were selected for the interviews last time, and then give them the request for proposal, and then the committee would, again, interview them. So what we're recommending is that we do an invite-only process on the request for proposals. And I believe it's just to cover the construction management firm and the architectural firm.
Right.
And that and we are, as part of that motion, requesting that the full board give the facility committee, delegate the authority to them to do those interviews and make a recommendation to the board.
And
So
to
that-
put together the RFP, to review the RFP
Review the
without it
RFP.
coming back to the full board. So, just to add to what Dave said, there'd be really a couple different parts to this. First of all, delegating authority to the committee to review and approve the documents for the RFP, so we can not delay with getting those and have those hit the street. Second of all, go forward with an invite only with our finalists from the last time we went through this process. And then looking at the committee really look at doing the interviews and having recommendations coming to the board for architect looking in September and the construction management firm for October. So that's based off of, regardless of scope of what you decide for a referendum, if we want to have the conversations of a referendum in the fall of 2020, these are the first two pieces that need to move.
Given that you've already gone through that process just a few years ago, I'd like to make the motion that we accept the proposal of the facility committee to facilitate the project.
Any other questions or concerns on that process? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. HR committee, we did not meet this month, but we do have a second reading on the guidelines for all employee groups, and they were on your attachment, so we do need to vote on those at this time.
I move we approve the invoice.
Second.
Any concerns about any of the guidelines? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Consent agendas. We can take it all. We can pull anything out.
I'd like to pull out the student handbook. Or is that the parent? There was one for the family.
It's the family handbook.
The family handbook.
Okay. So consent agendas with the family handbook pulled out.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Any discussions on the items left minus the family handbook? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
And now quickly, Dave, explain why.
Explain why.
There was just, the change on page 14.
Which family handbook, Dave?
The K-6 family handbook, although I'm not sure if it was in the other ones, I didn't find it all. The first was just a question. You had the food service milk accounting system. You added a sentence, please be aware that payments are no longer accepted at each individual school, which was checks to the food service. I'm trying to understand why it was that much of a burden on us that if a parent is at like Heritage and drops off, or at Prairie and drops off a check for food service, why we can't send it to the food service office. Now they have to take it to the food service office directly or mail it to them. We didn't even put the mailing address in. Or they have to drop it off at 101 School Drive. Why, if they drop it off at the office at Prairie, why can't it get over there fairly simply? Because I honestly, if you're a parent going to Prairie, you're gonna drop it off at Prairie. It just seems simple.
Do you have any background on that, Steve?
Can you read that again, Dave?
Please be aware, okay, so it's on page 17, under food service milk accounting system. Checks are to be made payable to the Waunakee Community Schools. That's the way it was. The addition was, please be aware that payments are no longer accepted in each individual school. Or that's what's in bold, so I'm assuming that was a change. Or maybe that's the way it's always been.
That is not a change. So I think it's something probably that somebody caught and put it into the handbook. So payments for quite a few years have, the majority of
More
them
is online.
The majority of them are online. So an overwhelming amount of the payments for food service comes in electronically. For those who don't pay electronically, typically payments are mailed into 101 School Drive because they're recorded directly by Taher into the Infinite Campus system, or people drop it off there. If a parent dropped a check off at the office, of course we'll inter-school mail it over to 101 School Drive, but the intent is for the payments to go to the Taher location so they can record it right into the system.
They don't want those checks floating around.
Right.
So we're not really pushing this, it's just there. Okay.
Right. Yep.
The bigger one came up, which this is a change. The next paragraph down on free and reduced lunch, it said if a household has not been approved by the first day of school, and then it lists this year as September 3, 2019, students must bring a sack lunch or pay for their meals until the application has been approved. Well, that makes sense, but could we make it retroactive that if you are approved, anything you had paid would be reimbursed to you? Because if you were eligible, but we hadn't gotten you through the approval process yet, then you should have been eligible from day one. And if this is a family that is eligible for that, we should obviously give them what we can if they're eligible for the free and reduced program.
So we do process all of those applications in a very timely manner. So it's not due to an application not being processed, it's due to it not being turned in. So as an example, someone may choose not to turn it in until October 15th, or someone may not turn it in until December 1st. So the intent behind that statement is just to indicate that until you go through the process, you're not approved for free and reduced. It's designed to encourage people to turn it in. The federal National School Lunch Program does not have a retroactive piece to it, and we have adopted the provisions just like we did have a federal program in place. So once you apply, you become eligible from that point moving forward. So if someone applies in November 1st, they're then eligible from that point through the rest of that school year, but not backwards.
Would it, okay, let's say, so if I turned mine in on October 1st,
Yep.
and you approved me October 15th, say, by the time you figure it all out, did that apply from October 1st then, or from October 15th?
So the forms are handled immediately. So if someone brings one in, we have a dedicated person in the Taher office who just handles this. So we would never have a delay like that. So that when someone brings it in, their information is put into Infinite Campus, and the Infinite Campus automatically will generate a letter that we send out immediately. So there is virtually no delay from the time an application goes into the food service department. We would never see a delay of that magnitude.
Okay. Well, based on the wording, I was concerned that there
Sure.
is some version of a delay, since there's some sort of approval process. But if you're saying that basically they get it within a day or two, then I guess it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, there is not a delay. When during the school year, we have an individual in the office who handles that daily. So in the middle of August, sure, when she gets 50 of them, it'll take her a few days to get through them, but they will all be done by the start of school.
Okay, motion to approve the handbook.
Second.
Any other questions? All in favor?
Aye.
No, I wasted enough time, so.
Thank you.
That's all good.
It's all good. Board business, right? We're down to board business. Hi, just moving along.
So board business, we just have the resolutions from WASB. Those are included in the extras tab, and there's also a link for where you can find them online. So those are
You
some,
can't sleep at night, go take a
you
look.
can look at those.
And it'll put you to sleep.
Yes. All right.
Future agendas and meetings.
Let's just deal with the special meeting first, piece first.
Okay.
See, whenever we have a special meeting, there's certain statutory rules we have to follow. So I'm going to have us do something tonight, and then Rebecca, you and I'll dig into it tomorrow. So our special meeting that we have scheduled for
July
was
23rd.
July 23rd is going to be canceled. We're not going to do that. And we are looking to hold, as an alternative for that meeting, a special meeting on either August 6th, 19th, 20th, or 21st, pending availability of Mike and others. So if I can just have a motion on a special meeting on one of those 4 days, pending outcome. Let's do that, because otherwise what I'm going to have to do, and I may have to do it anyway, I have to send certified letters. Because if it's on the 6th, it's before our next board meeting,
Yeah.
and then it's a special meeting requires specific notification from the clerk with regards to that. So let's just make the motion and approve those, and then I will look into it. But at least then I have that motion to deal with, and I don't think it's,
I approve the motion.
thank you, I need a second.
For all those possible dates, and then we just hold the one we need.
That's what I'm going to try to do. I don't think that's going to do it, but I wanted to at least have that done
So-
here so that I can look into it tomorrow.
You got Jack and you got
Mark.
Mark
Mark.
a second.
Yep.
So all in favor of that
Aye.
special
Aye.
meeting?
Yep.
Aye.
So once I get it set, if you do get a special letter and I work with our clerk to write that, that will be why, because it's a special process. I think the other meetings that we need, a budget meeting, Steve, is that correct?
So we do need a budget committee meeting to look at the fourth draft of the budget. The August board meeting is the 12th. So some options would be July 29th or 30th, or August 5th, 6th, 7th, or 8th.
I am not available on August 5.
The 29th doesn't work for me, the 30th would.
What about the 30th? I'm good with the 30th.
I prefer not, because I'm working, and that's the night of the library dedication.
But the morning?
I can't do
work
the
at
morning.
Oh,
8:15.
okay. Okay.
You do 6:30?
Well, I would. I'd be happy to come in at 5 in the morning.
I could do 5 in the morning. That gives me enough time to get to the Walmart by 7.
Steve is like rolling his eyes like, whoa.
They're dedicated budget
5:15
time.
every morning, what do I care?
How about,
31st?
So if you can't do the 30th,
31st? Is that one you threw out too?
No.
No.
29, 30, or 5, 6, 7, or 8.
How about the weekend?
How about the
7
fifth?
would work for me.
The 7th? I can do the 7th.
7?
Sure, why not? I'm trying to
You got a
figure out a
different
trip
date?
to South Dakota, but I haven't got it figured out yet, so.
It's gonna stay there for a
Anything
while.
4 o'clock or later.
South Dakota's not moved out.
Yeah, that's true.
I won't be
What time
able to
on
be
the
there,
7th?
but
I don't care.
that'll work. Fine with them.
I'm totally
4?
free.
4?
Sure.
4.
I'll still have my hard hat on, but that'll be good.
All right.
You had to take your lump sum out.
All right. Facilities meeting, we need that before Dave, before you leave, Dave.
Would that work
Facilities
at
meeting?
5 o'clock that night?
Oh, the same night?
Yeah.
Oh, you're not?
I'm not available that night. It's fine to hold it. I just can't be there on the 7th.
Well, let's see, facilities is 1, 2, Jack. Could we do you want to do that the week before then? I'm fine with doing it at 5, but if you want to go back to the 29th, 30th, 31st stuff.
29th?
Jack,
Are you, yeah, 29.
the 29th works?
And is that Mike?
Yeah, that's Mike.
Let's schedule it and I can at least check with him then if we have to.
Why don't we, can you do the 30th and 31st?
I could do either of those.
So why don't we schedule it for the 29th and check with Mike on for the other dates?
All right.
Does that work?
Yep. So what time did we say? 5:30?
You want to be
Or-
that late?
No, what time did you say? I'm sorry.
4, 4:30? I don't care.
5 o'clock?
5
All right.
PM or AM?
There you go.
29th
So-
at 5 a.m.
So we'll do the 29th. If that doesn't work with Mike, we'll also look at the 30th or 31st. That works for you? All right. I think for right now, given where we're at with scheduling, I think we're good.
Okay, done?
That's it?
We're done.
All right, I need a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second, all in favor?
I
Joe,
missed
you did
8:30.
well. I didn't think that was gonna
I
happen.
missed 8:30.
You missed 8:30, I missed 9 o'clock.
All right, thank you all.
Let's just think that we were good time. Because I think like, we talked about it. Sit down, please.
So I didn't return my last one, so my apologies.
Yeah,
We're
I
gonna do
know.
a special.
That's why you